8 musicians hired to play on the Titanic died in the tragedy. They had been broken up into 2 groups to play in different locations around the ship. Violinist Wallace Hartley was the band leader. As the ship was sinking, rather than retiring to their rooms or trying to find lifeboats, they started to play in the first-class lounge. It was the first time all 8 musicians played together. Over their uniforms, they strapped on their life belts and continued to play, even when it was becoming difficult to stand. Some survivors said it was Wallace Hartley who began playing Nearer My God to Thee as the ship went down. When his body was recovered days later, his leather valise was strapped to him, holding his sheet music.
Ronald Reagan was a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. It was leadership, pure and simple.
In good times and bad, Ronald Reagan embodied optimism. This is so true that I don't even have to tell you his favorite joke. I only have to repeat the punchline. There must be a pony in here somewhere.
When he saw evil camped across the horizon, he called that evil by its name.
Talking about the Cold War, and he said it's not complicated. The way I look at it, we win, they lose.
I was asked later, do you trust Putin? I didn't want to plagiarize President Reagan. I gave one of the great responses, trust but verify, and I wasn't quick enough to think of anything clever that didn't sound like plagiarism. So I said, yeah.
I will always see President Reagan as the last great gentleman of American politics.
The contributions that he made to this country were tremendous, but the contributions he made to the world were even greater.
Ronald Reagan understood that wealth came from the hard work and the intelligence and the creativity of free minds and free people and free markets. And Ronald Reagan trusted ordinary people to make better decisions in their lives than to rely upon Washington bureaucrats, and we should too.
Just when the Reagan Revolution was declared over, millions are being inspired to repeat it, to insist on it. And woe to the leaders in Washington today if they fail to respect it.
I love what Ronald Reagan said. I have to read these to make sure I get the quote quite right. He said, governments don't reduce deficits by raising taxes on people. Government reduces deficits by controlling spending and stimulating new wealth. That's what America's all about.
He was not a great president because he was afraid of his principles. He was a great president because he had principles, and he never wavered from governing with them.
Ronald Reagan knew that in this country the issue was not right versus left, it was right versus wrong, and standing up for freedom is always right every time.
There's only Ronald Reagan could do. He shook his head and said, and they call me an actor.
He was a magnificent leader. And anytime I get a chance to speak about his record, I'm proud to do so. And when somebody says, Mr. President, I don't have to ask what president you're talking about. There's only one Mr. President as far as I'm concerned.
History is going to be very kind to Ronald Reagan. When he was our president, ladies and gentlemen, we were indeed a shining city on a hill.
It is a great honor. I don't do a lot of these events. And I want to thank the people at the Reagan Library. You know, this isn't just a library. I consider this like a national town hall meeting place for people who remember the Reagan Revolution and think we need another. So, thank you very much.
artifacts from real passengers are united for the first time in a century. Titanic at the Reagan Library.
It's very interesting. It's very educational.
If you've seen the movie, you think you know the story, but this exhibit shows so much more.
It's interesting to see a melding of the artifacts with the movie props.
It's a really great exhibit, and I learned so much about the Titanic.
It's very emotional. It's very moving.
Titanic, now open at the Reagan Library.
John Jacob Astor IV, considered the wealthiest man in the world at the time, traveled aboard Titanic with his new wife, Madeline. Madeline was rescued aboard lifeboat number 4. It is said that John Astor got into another lifeboat, but when he saw 2 frightened children on the deck, he stepped aside to give his place to them. When he noticed a little boy rejected from another boat, he put a girl's hat on him and said, "Now he's a girl and he can go." Last reports of John Astor noted he was wearing his tuxedo dinner suit, complete with his favorite personalized pocket watch, sipping a brandy. When his body was found floating in the North Atlantic days later, it was still clothed in the jacket he was wearing with the pocket watch still attached. In 1907, White Star Line chairman Bruce Ismay imagined a new class of ship, the biggest, most luxurious ships that had ever sailed. In 1908, the plan for building the sister ships Titanic and Olympic were approved. He sailed on the fateful maiden voyage, jumping into collapsible boat C, for which he was criticized the rest of his life. He left the ship in his pajamas and overcoat. The highest-ranking White Star Line executive to survive the sinking, Ismay was later questioned by the U.S. Senate about the night's events. He also had to turn in his ship's rules and regulations book as evidence.
Because his pitch was, look, and it's a really interesting pitch, and turned out to be quite valid. He said, look, I can find the Titanic with this gear, your Navy secret robotic gear and your imaging sonars and so forth. And the president I know, with his forward strategy, wants to really play with the Soviets' mind to make them think we can do far more even than we're capable of, and we're capable of a lot. So let me find the Titanic. Give me 2 weeks and I'll find it. Let me make it public. Let me show the videos from the robots roaming through the ballrooms, and this will drive the Soviet Union crazy, because they'll think, oh, if they're ready to publicize this capability, which we don't have, imagine what else they're doing. So the logic was pretty compelling, but really just to quiet him. I couldn't stand the constant buzz in my ears for 10. So I said, okay, I'll recommend it to the president that we approve it, but just for 2 weeks.
Welcome to Titanic at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum, open now through January 7th, 2018. In this video podcast, we'll take a look at this first-of-its-kind 10,000 square foot exhibition, which reunites hundreds of Titanic artifacts that have not been together since the ship's fateful night in 1912, alongside materials and artifacts from the 1985-86 discovery of the Titanic, as well as sets, props, and costumes from the 1997 blockbuster movie. This exhibition has not been seen anywhere else before. The Titanic was seen as an unsinkable ship. While she was a marvel of engineering with her watertight compartments and her double keel, she sank on her maiden voyage on April 15, 1912. Found in 1985 by Dr. Robert Ballard during a top-secret mission on Cold War espionage, while searching for the nuclear submarines USS Thresher and USS Scorpion, Titanic at the Reagan Library tells the complex story of this magnificent ship, the tragedy of her demise, and her surprising discovery in the 1980s.
But I'd learned a tremendous amount from mapping the Scorpion that taught me how to find the Titanic, because when the Scorpion tragically sank, it imploded and it went off like a bomb, and all of the contents of the Scorpion went into the water column. But as it was falling to the ocean floor, the currents were carrying the lighter material, and there was this fallout where the reactor went straight down like a bowling ball, but then lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. And as I was mapping it, I found that the comet of debris was over a mile long. And that's when I got the idea, don't look for the Titanic, look for its trail of debris.
Titanic at the Reagan Library honors the 1,500 souls who perished on Titanic, along with the 267 brave American seamen who perished on the Thresher and Scorpion. Out of respect, none of the artifacts displayed in this exhibition were salvaged from the wreck itself, a sacred final resting place. Found in 1985 during President Reagan's administration, the Titanic quickly became a dive site for many different companies and explorers trying to get a piece of her history. To protect the historic site and preserve it for generations, President Reagan issued the 1986 R.M.S. Titanic Memorial Act to designate the wreck as an international maritime memorial. Every artifact in this exhibit was either retrieved at the time of the sinking, was recovered from the top of the ocean during the recovery mission, or was carried off the ship by survivors.
We made a promise to never take anything, to never desecrate the site, because it was like, to take something off the Titanic was like to take belt buckles off the Arizona, or to go to Gettysburg with a shovel. You don't do that. And we felt that it was a site that deserved respect, and it remained that way for the rest of the expedition, the rest of my life.
A historic collection of real artifacts from the Titanic, alongside items used in the discovery of the famed ship, Titanic at the Reagan Library combines real stories and real artifacts from the real people on board the ship. Dramatically set with props, sets, and costumes from the blockbuster movie about the R.M.S. Titanic, it is a must-see collaboration of secrets, cinema, and artifacts.
And then the next really watershed moment in my life, of course, would have to be 1995, when I found out that Jim Cameron was out there in the North Atlantic and was down filming the wreck for a possible major motion picture feature. And one thing led to another, and he hired me as his visual historian. It was the title that they gave me. And Don Lynch as the historian.
I was surprised when I got to the ship how well I knew the ship. I've always studied the story, and on August 27th, 2001, pulled up to the side, and rather than coming up towards the bow like they do in all the films and everything, we actually approached the side. And I was in a submersible with Jim, and he said, "There's the Titanic, Don." And as we rose up, I started recognizing from the porthole arrangements where we were, and I knew who had occupied this cabin here and the next one, and I was amazed that I knew the ship as well as I did.
Using movie sets, props, and costumes, Titanic at the Reagan Library is able to recreate the ship for the visitor. See Rose and Cal's suite, Jack's bunk, the Marconi room where telegraphists Harold Bride and Jack Phillips sent out SOS signals, and even a lifeboat. It's important to note that this is not a traveling exhibition. To see the story of the Titanic told in this unique way, visitors must come to the Reagan Library. Whether you are a fan of genuine history or larger-than-life Hollywood, this is truly a once-in-a-life exhibition that sheds light on the Titanic in a first-ever way no museum has ever attempted before. For more information or to pre-purchase tickets, please visit reaganlibrary.com/Titanic. Tickets also include admission into the Reagan Library Museum and Air Force One Pavilion. Highlights of the exhibit include Alvin, the titanium submersible sphere that brought Dr. Bob Ballard down to the wreckage of Titanic, the first such submersible to do so. Sheet music for Narcissus, which was found on the body of Wallace Hartley, the Titanic band leader who refused to stop playing even as the ship began to sink. A deck chair from the Titanic, one of only 8 known to exist, as well as the only known widow's seat deck chair from the Carpathia, the only known complete set of boarding documents and tickets from the Titanic, John Jacob Astor IV's pocket watch, found on his body days after the Titanic sank, and his wife's life vest she wore to her safety, the claim form from Margaret Brown, otherwise known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, and the Egyptian talisman she carried off the ship. Marion Wright Wolcott's wool coat, the one she wore when she escaped in Lifeboat 9, then later wore to her wedding, then later cut strips of fabric from to make Bible covers for her 3 sons as they served overseas. Original film footage of the Titanic's maiden voyage and the Mackay Bennett's recovery mission, and so much more.
Despite 105 years since this epic catastrophe, it just doesn't go away. Like with me as a teenager, it gets into your blood somehow. It's in the breath and the blood of civilization. It keeps coming back. 100 years from now, and I've always said this, people will still be finding photographs of Titanic between the pages of a book in an attic somewhere. They're turning up, they're still turning up, and they will continue to turn up, I'm sure, for a long, long time to come.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this Inside the Reagan Library video. See you soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. At this time, please turn off all electronic devices. Please refrain from using flash photography during the program. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Bob Ballard.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name's John Highbush. I have the honor of being the Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, and I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. In honor of our men and women in uniform who protect our freedoms around the world, if you'd please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Let me start by saying that I think it's a good bet that everyone gathered here this evening has had the chance to visit our special exhibit on the Titanic. I hope if you have that you enjoyed the experience. If you did, then I've no doubt that you're going to truly appreciate hearing from our special guest this evening. Were it not for him, there'd be no such exhibit on the Titanic, or at best, there'd be a somewhat boring presentation on mankind's continued quest to try to find the ship. With us tonight are several people responsible for creating the exhibit. I just want to point them out, three gentlemen in particular: Duke Blackwood, director of the Reagan Library; Randy Swan, our curator; and Rob Zuka, another curator for us. If you all would stand, well, thank you. For those that have not had the chance to see the exhibit, sit tight. There's no reason to lose your seat to see the incredible artifacts from the ship and the stories of the famous but tragic maiden voyage that we bring to life in the exhibit. The exhibit will be here until January 7th, 2018, but do see it before it leaves, as it's definitely worth your while. Now, I've no doubt that it's the Titanic that brought many of you to the Reagan Library to hear Dr. Bob Ballard, one of our nation's most foremost and famous explorers. As an explorer, he has won the highest possible honors: National Geographic's Hubbard Medal, along with Sir Ernest Shackleton, Admiral Richard Byrd, and astronaut Neil Armstrong. He's also earned the Explorers Club Medal, the Order of Magellan, the Livingston Medal, and the Lindbergh Award. But I think it's critical for all of us to recognize that Dr. Ballard, as famous as he might be as an explorer, is also an important figure in several other ways. First and foremost, he's a scientist and an educator. And not just any scientist or any educator. I think he might well tell you that during his 150 expeditions around the globe, it's his work in the discovery of wonders such as hydrothermal vents, hot springs on the ocean floor, or the many deep-sea archaeological finds you might never have heard of before that he'd just as soon be known for. Or it's his Jason Foundation efforts, those that have helped to educate more than 15 million students and middle school teachers as they join him through telepresence in his undersea world. Those of you who've had a chance to visit our exhibit know this. With just a press of a button, you too can go aboard the EV Nautilus, the flagship operated by Dr. Ballard's Ocean Exploration Trust. You can watch their work and ask questions of his talented young scientists and crew. 60,000 questions were recently posed by people from all over the world during just one of his expeditions. Along those lines, it's only appropriate that we reached out to Royal High School here in Simi Valley and invited a number of their students to be with us tonight. 2 of them will be lucky enough to have dinner with Dr. Ballard this evening. And when they do, they'll be dining with one of our nation's most famous teachers. After all, it was a 17-year-old Bob Ballard that jumped aboard a Scripps ship just a few hours south of here that pursued his dreams as a student and discovered so much to this day. One particular quote of Bob's that I've always most admired is, he said, quote, "As a child, I was always curious about things, and I was fortunate enough not to have that passion extinguished as I grew up." Now, President Reagan knew passion and talent when he saw it. Years ago, he invited Dr. Ballard to the White House, along with former astronaut and Senator John Glenn and Jacques Cousteau, to hear firsthand about their work. And to hear Bob's story of that visit, I think he enjoyed his time with our nation's 40th president. We're glad that he did, and we are especially pleased to have him at President Reagan's library tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please join me in welcoming to the stage explorer, scientist, and teacher, Dr. Robert Ballard.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You left a couple critical pieces of information out. One is that I was born in Wichita, Kansas, where all oceanographers come from. You remember that. But that didn't last long. My father flew with Chuck Yeager during the war as a test pilot, so I actually woke up in the Mojave Desert. But I grew up here in Los Angeles, and this is where I fell in love with the sea as a kid. And my father went into outer space, my brother went into particle physics, and I was the dumb one that jumped in the ocean and went down to the bottom of the ocean. It's a big puddle, as you can imagine. Think about it, 72% of our planet is covered by water. We have better maps of Mars than we have of our own planet. We're trying to do something about that, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But here I was going to Downey High School, and then I went off to UC Santa Barbara and majored in geology and chemistry. And then I was at USC getting my doctorate in marine geology when there was a knock on the door. And there was a naval officer on the other side of the door, and I found it odd because I had gone through, I was trained as an infantry officer during Vietnam. I volunteered for the Vietnam War as an infantry officer. But I was on delay to call while I went to graduate school, thinking that as soon as I finished, I was headed to Vietnam. This is 1966, 67. And there was a naval officer standing at the door with an envelope. And he said, "Congratulations," and I went, "What are you talking about?" "You're no longer an Army officer, you're a naval officer, and you have 6 days to report for active duty." Really? Yeah. And I said, "My closet's full of green uniforms." He said, "Better get some white and blue ones," So I went down to San Pedro. But my real career in the oceans began when I arrived, let's see if I get the right buttons here, at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I never heard of it. Scripps never told me there was another oceanographic institution. Got in my little VW and I drove across the United States, and first time our family had gone in the other direction. We'd landed in Virginia in 1635 and walked across America, and I was the first generation to go back the other way. A little quicker the second time, But I was a naval officer assigned to the deep diving program at Woods Hole, and for the first, through my active Navy career, I was assigned particularly to this submarine on the left, which is a very, very special submarine that very few people have ever heard of. and you weren't supposed to hear. It's called the NR-1. It's the smallest nuclear submarine that was ever built. And it was, when I was a child, and my parents asked me what I wanted to be, I always told them I wanted to be Captain Nemo. Because I'd read the book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I saw the movie with Kirk Douglas and James Mason, who was Captain Nemo. And I just wanted to be Captain Nemo. Now, you talked about passion, and the critical thing is you should never laugh at a child's passion. Never, ever laugh at a child's passion. And when I told my parents that I just wanted to be Captain Nemo, I'm sure they went in the other room and said, Houston, we have a problem, but they didn't say it to me, and they encouraged me to follow my dream, because it's your passion that gets you up. I always tell kids, do not avoid failure. It's the greatest teacher you'll ever meet. And when it knocks you down, it's your passion that'll get you back up. So you have to have passion. That's why I focus on middle school children, when children are forming their passions. And that's a critical point, with planting that passion in a child. Like I said, I was lucky that my passion was not extinguished by the educational process. And so here I was wanting to go in this, and then I was assigned to the closest we've ever come to building the Nautilus was the NR-1. A nuclear submarine, just like the Nautilus, could dive, you could go underwater for normally a month at a time. And it was a deep diving submarine. And it had windows, and it had wheels, and you could drive around the bottom of the ocean. And this was the coolest submarine. And I spent 30 years in and out of that submarine, and they decommissioned it, but they put the top part of it right near my house up in New London in Connecticut, so I could go there and can rub it once in a while. But so I spent my early career getting in submarines, trying not to get killed. Both of these guys tried to kill me. This was with a fire at 9,000 feet, and this one was crashing into the side of a volcano at 20,000 feet. But I graduated to the Alvin, and that was really my little home away from home for so many years at Woods Hole, when I first was assigned to it as a naval officer, and then went on to get my PhD and stuck with it and stayed at Woods Hole for 30 years, actually, because they had Alvin. And the wonderful thing about Alvin was it's tiny. It's really nothing like the NR-1 or even, I've been on fast attacks and boomers, and they're a little bigger. But Alvin is, I shot this picture with a fisheye lens, so it looks like it's really roomy. It's not. I'm 6'2", and the submarine sphere is 6 feet. So I can't even stand up in it. I used to have a lot of hair. I tore it all off. Right there. There's a lot of Bob Ballard hair, you know, the DNA people can. I'm sure there's still scalp fragments here. I tore my head off on that thing. But when you dive in the submarine, you take 3 people with you, and a pilot, both of us have had hundreds of dives of experience, but you always taking a graduate student on their first dive. And they've never been in a submarine. And so we have to have initiations, and we do all sorts of initiations. There's no bathroom in the submarine to begin with. So we know we're going to die. We dehydrate. We don't drink for the day. We just completely dehydrate our body while we're filling the graduate student with coffee. They do have a little, sort of like a Tupperware bottle called a Human Element Range Extender, or HERE. HERE, H-E-R-E, Human Element Range Extender. It's right here. But anyway, there was all sorts of initiation, but that isn't really why I did it. But I went into a world that you just don't think exists. When you think of the floor of the ocean, you think of something flat. Most people think if you walked across the ocean, you start on the East Coast, and you walk across, and it goes down, and then it goes back up, and you're in Europe. Not. The largest mountain ranges, the greatest geological features of our planet are beneath the sea. And we just don't think about that. But that's my world. It's not this. In fact, to give you a sense of scale, this is a mountain range I spend a lot of time exploring. This is the Mid-Ocean Ridge. The largest mountain range. It runs around our planet like the seam of a baseball. And it's here where the Earth is creating its outer skin, because the Earth is a creature. It's a living organism, and right now it's very angry with us. I think the Earth's trying to get rid of us. I think it thinks we're a skin infection or something. But to give you a sense of scale, this is Mount Everest up against the Big Island of Hawaii. Most of the Big Island's down there. This is we always have this on Facebook, this is on a face saver on our computer or screensaver. This is El Capitan up against one wall I've dove on that's 20,000 feet complete. That's to scale. This is the Grand Canyon in one of the smaller deep sea trenches. The Grand Canyon is a ditch compared to the canyons that we work in. So just look at the sense of scale of what's down there that we just don't have an appreciation for. And so I've spent so much time, I've been now, I don't know, I'm 75 and I started diving when I was 17. So I've been underwater a lot and I've spent a lot of time in that mountain range. But this is where I began my academic career, as the concept of plate tectonics, proving that the Earth was actually a creature and that it could regenerate its skin. But the site of crustal genesis was along that mountain range. And so this was where the Earth's skin is ripping itself open. And just like when we cut ourselves, we bleed warm blood. And that warm blood comes to the surface and coagulates and forms new skin. If you cut the Earth, it bleeds as well. It'll bleed its blood, a little hotter than ours. It's 12 to 1400 degrees centigrade. But it comes out of the body of the planet and along where it's being torn open and creates new tissue. And that tissue hardens and then it pulls it apart and there's a constant genesis of crustal tissue. But since the Earth isn't expanding or contracting, it's in steady state, if you create new tissue on the Earth somewhere else, you have to consume old tissue. And that's what's happening where the plates are in collision. The oceanic plate goes back inside the Earth, and the continental buckles up into great mountain ranges. All our great mountain ranges are collisions of these plates. But no one had actually gone to the boundary of creation. No one had actually gone down and witnessed this process till a group of us, over a series of about 6 years, began exploring different segments of this mountain range. Now, to give you a sense, this is the Earth's crust as a function of age. So ground zero for us is the black line. This is tens of thousands of active volcanoes right now generating new tissue. That's ground zero. And then as they move away, you get older and older crust. You'll notice that the width of the bands are different because the plates are moving at different speeds. Plates that have continents on their backs, like the African plate or the North American plate, don't move as fast as plates that have no continent on their back. And so you have the Cocos plate and Nazca plate and the Pacific plate, and they're trucking. To give you a sense of that, the Atlantic Ocean will widen your height in your lifetime. It'll get roughly the length of your body in life. In the Pacific, it's 10 times faster. So it's 10 centimeters a year. It's really trucking. And that's a huge amount of molten tissue being formed. So we were the first to actually go down and explore that mountain range. And to give you a sense, this is at the slow spreading one, so this will give you a sense of reference. We went here first on a slow spreading ridge, and then we went on a fast spreading ridge. The slow spreading ridge has huge mountain range. But on the fast spreading ridge, the plates are pulling it out, so it's not even called a ridge. The Mid-Atlantic ridge is a ridge. The East Pacific rise is a rise. So look at the difference in scale of topography to here versus here. But here, the volume of lava is immense compared to what's happening in the Atlantic. And it was in these initial discoveries, and people say, what's your greatest discovery? It definitely wasn't the Titanic. We knew it was there. And as you'll notice, it actually was a cover for a military operation. I can finally tell the truth. But anyway, we were exploring this mountain range to understand this creation process. And it was interesting because where we go, it's pitch black. So, I really need to turn. I don't know if I can actually do that without doing something terrible. No? Sometimes they give you a little button, but I'm not going to do that. Everything will blow up. But anyway, it's a world of eternal darkness. And because of that, sunlight cannot get down. And because of that, you can't have photosynthesis, and yet, or much marine life. And then we discovered not only that, is the Earth is belching out these black smokers, and everything you see in this picture is commercial grade ore of copper, lead, silver, zinc, and gold. We are finding vast, rich mineral deposits all along the ocean floor. And in fact, just now, mining companies are filing to mine this copper, lead, silver, zinc, and gold. I don't know how much they found of that on the moon. I think they should fund us more than that. But discovering these exotic life forms, I can remember coming in on these creatures, and these characterized by these giant worms. And these worms were, I just collected one last year, it was 13 feet tall. And then I found these giant clams. I mean, and it didn't look like a clam. In fact, it looked like liver. I never liked liver. I don't eat pumps and filters. But anyway, when we got this clam, look how big that guy is, and I dissected him, and he had no internal organs, no mouth, no gut, no digestive system. He looked like a clam, but he wasn't. In fact, his entire body was full of another creature that we didn't know about, called an extremophile, that was living in this toxic environment and convinced, and the same extremophiles are in these giant worms. This extremophile talked clams and worms into a deal called symbiosis. It says, you know, these volcanoes have poisonous toxic gases called hydrogen sulfide. I want you to breathe that for me. And what kind of conversation could that have been, you know? Like a clam going, what? He says, yeah, I just want you to breathe it. You know, just take it in and give it to me, and I'll feed you better than you can feed yourself. Well, it convinced him, and it then gave up all its body interior for this guy to live inside of it. And these extremophiles are living in extremely hostile environments. And this discovery is now pioneering our exploration in outer space, because we are now convinced that life is pervasive throughout the universe. There's life throughout the universe, and probably within our own solar system. And the ones we're focusing on are some moons of Jupiter called Europa, or Enceladus, or Saturn. And we believe that we will find life there. Now, I don't think we're going to find terribly smart clams, but I'm confident that there is life within our own solar system. So I'd like NASA to get that over with so we can move on and explore our own planet. But anyway, but the problem I was having in my explorations was getting to work. The average depth of the ocean is 12 to 13,000 feet. So to take a submarine down there, because you're going up against the coefficient of drag, which has an exponential function in it, so you can't increase your weight and expect a comparable increase in ascent and descent. You have to add 10 times. And it's just not practical to completely load yourself up with big pieces of pig iron and get you to sink faster. So we reach a terminal velocity of about 100 feet a minute. And so it takes to get to the Titanic, which is at 12,000 feet, it took 2.5 hours each way. So how would you like to have a job where the commute is 5 hours a day? And you're going to do it the next day. So how much time do you actually spend on the bottom? I did it for 20 years, and I was about 3 hours that I was actually on the bottom. And then when I was diving to 20,000 feet, it was 6 hours each way. I was lucky to spend a few minutes before I had to go back up. So I was basically using an elevator, spending all my time doing this and this. And what I really wanted to do is this and this. So I took a sabbatical, and I went to Stanford, and I was teaching geophysics, and this is 1979. And everything was cooking back, microprocessing, digital imagery, fiber optics, all the cool things. I should have thought, I could make a cell phone with this, but I didn't. I was too focused, too passionate about exploration. But it gave me an idea, and in fact, I came back from my sabbatical at Stanford, and I published in National Geographic the December 1981 issue of my vision of future way of exploring. I called it telepresence. Now, Citgo patented it, but it was my word, but they let me use it. But the idea was to have an out-of-body experience. The idea was to move away from sending my body down to sending my spirit. So your spirit is indestructible and has no mass and can move at the speed of light. And as we age, you know, our body is not, you know, starts to not respond as well as we'd like it to. And so, but your spirit's indestructible. So I said, why don't we just move our spirits around and then put our bodies in a safe spot? And in fact, I can now do everything from the bottom of the ocean from my bedroom if I wanted to. And so I published this cartoon, and then I'm amassing a great group of engineers. So we have a joint program with MIT, and I started amassing an amazing group of engineers. And I said, turn this cartoon into an engineering design. And I remember the first time I showed it to my engineers, they went, "You're nuts." I said, "Well, that's given, but what's that got to do with this, you know?" And they said, well, and they looked at it, and engineers are amazing, because my father was head of the Minuteman missile program, and I grew up with engineers. Engineers are always underestimating what they can do, unless you challenge them. In fact, there's a great saying in science that a scientist is like an ideal gas. He can expand to fill any volume, but he can only do work under pressure. And so I always like to create an artificial pressure. So I said, what's wrong? And they said, and so they looked at everything. I said, you know, now I knew a lot of this was classified military technology at the time, so I was a little cheaty and we had mapping systems that were highly classified. We had all sorts of stuff, fiber optics and all that. And they said, well, I said, tell me the law of physics that I'm breaking with this cartoon. They looked at it, and they looked at one another, and they said, well, yeah, it's possible. And I have them. As soon as they said it's possible, you're toast. And I said, then build it. And so they designed it, and this was translating the cartoon. It was called the Argo-Jason system. But the idea was if I could move my body, spirit, into what we now call an end effector, a vehicle. If this could become like, you know, the Navi in Jim Cameron's movie, where you transferred a person into another thing. I wanted to put our body into another piece of machinery. And so, but I needed someone to fund it. And the academic world said, you know, it's a little too risky. So I went back to the Navy, and they said, we'll fund it, but you need to do some things for us. Roger that. And we had lost 2 submarines during the Cold War, the Thresher and the Scorpion. In the case of the Scorpion, it was armed with nuclear weapons. And we don't really like leaving them around. But we needed cover because we didn't want the Soviets to follow me to the side. We knew approximately where the submarines were from our SOSUS arrays. We heard them die, and we could triangulate roughly where they were. But we didn't want a satellite over our head, leading them to our weapon systems. So they said, you need a cover. And I said, have I got the cover for you? And that's what's downstairs. I feel so good about having the truth finally told after so many. Because, you know, I was a Cub Scout, a Boy Scout, an Explorer Scout, an Army, and you're supposed to, on my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country. I was trained to tell the truth, and I always had to say, you know, I couldn't tell the truth. I couldn't tell the story because it was classified until they finally declassified it. So thank you very much for finally telling my story after so many years. But I learned a lot from going after the Thresher and the Scorpion. They taught me how to find the Titanic. Again, I couldn't tell anyone how I'd figured that out, but when they imploded catastrophically, they just, you know, massive amounts of material went into the water, and as they free fell to the bottom, they were carried by the currents, and that created a debris trail. And that debris trail was much longer than the signature of the submarine, or in the case of the Titanic signature. So I didn't look for the Titanic. I looked for its debris. I could calculate it. I knew a lot of information, and I was able to calculate how to go after it by doing very widely spaced lines looking for the debris trail. And then once I found the debris trail, I knew exactly what direction to go. So the Thresher and the Scorpion's tragic demise actually taught me how to find the Titanic. And so picking up that debris field of the Titanic, walking it through the boiler and right into the ship. And that was it. We were able to do that so much faster than the other search teams that all had failed, who had had much longer on target than I did, because I spent most of my time on the Thresher and the Scorpion. I had to do those jobs first before the Navy released me. Now, if you go and look in the exhibit, you'll see the Discovery team. You'll see my team in light blue, but then you'll see 4 people in dark blue. Those were the spooks embedded in my team. I said, you really, can't you wear, you're pretty obvious in these. But anyway, those were the naval personnel embedded in my team. But anyway, the Titanic was clearly the end of one story, but quite the beginning of another story, sort of realizing that the deep sea is a great preserver of human history. And so it went on to a whole series of expeditions, but we did do our job. We did get inside the Scorpion. And they haven't declassified all of that yet, but maybe I'll come back. But then we went on sort of a binge of finding human history, went off to the Bismarck, and that was amazing, another beautifully preserved ship in the deep sea. Lusitania, trying to explain the secondary explosion. The Titanic sister ship, the Britannics, sank by the Germans during the Battle of Gallipoli, going after the wounded of the battlefield. Fortunately, they were on their way, not coming back with all the wounded. That would have been a real catastrophic loss of life. Guadalcanal, the Yorktown, 17,000 feet of water. She was a hard one to find, sitting upright on the bottom. Even harder, President Kennedy's PT-109. That was a needle in a haystack, but we got it. And then most recently, our work in the Gulf of Mexico on a Nazi attack in America, when Hitler sent over these long endurance submarines. It sank a third of the shipping of all World War II they did during Operation Drumbeat in just the first few months of the war. We had no defenses against them at the time. And then I did a lot of work in ancient history, including the work in the Black Sea, where we found it to be the most preserving environment of all. It has no oxygen, and so there's nothing there to eat anything. In fact, I found a classical ship. Look at the state of preservation. That's been underwater 2 millenniums. Been underwater 2,000 years, but because it's in this dead zone, perfectly preserved. This is a ship I found from the classical period, 500 BC, with human remains. Human remains that have survived since 500 BC. So the deep sea is an amazing museum. I like to tell children that their generation is the generation of explorers, that the kids in middle school in 100 years will be known as the greatest explorers the human race ever had, because that generation in middle school will explore more of Earth than all previous generations combined. There's over 2 million to 3 million ancient ships that have yet to be found. We found less than 100. Just think what they're going to discover. If I could just live the rest of my life a day a year, I'd do it, just to see where it's going. That's after raising the kids. And then I went in to try to prove that the Black Sea was the site of the biblical flood, and we were able to document the exact moment when it took place, when the flood came in and changed it from a freshwater world to a saltwater world at 7,500 BPE, about 5,000 BC. So that was a fascinating expedition. But this is the one I'm working on now, which is an interesting one. So this goes back to President Thomas Jefferson cutting a deal with Napoleon. When Napoleon had sort of screwed up with the British and he owed him a lot of money, and he needed to settle a war debt. And Napoleon said, I'll sell you the Louisiana Purchase for $21 million. And Congress was totally against it. How's that sound? Huh? But like President Reagan, Jefferson was a man of action, and he said, I don't care, I'm going to do it. And he did it, and as you know, he then sent Lewis and Clark to find out what the heck he bought. But he had doubled the size of America for $21 million. And he made that great historic trip that Stephen Ambrose so beautifully documented in Undaunted Courage. If you haven't read that book, it's an amazing book of that story. And I think we all think, I was just where that elk was yesterday. I was standing almost at I just flew in from the Grand Tetons. I've been on a horse the last couple of weeks, so I'm glad I'm standing, I guess. Has it got an extra cushion for me? But anyway, I don't think anyone would argue that that wasn't a good deal for America. And then it was followed by the great wealth that came out of the Louisiana Purchase. Well, now let's jump forward to 1983 when President Ronald Reagan signed the Law of the Sea Convention for the price of a pen. Didn't cost us anything. He picked it up, and he signed it, and he doubled the size of the United States. And then that was followed by a bipartisan, oh my God, Republican president, that we really needed to explore this new Louisiana Purchase, the new Louisiana freebie, actually. And they then went on to say, okay, we need to now explore the new America. And I was commissioned again to bring a ship online, the Nautilus, along with a federally sponsored ship called the Oceanographic Explorer, which is actually an ex-Navy ship. And these two ships have the coolest mission you could ever ask for. Their mission is to go where no one has gone before on planet Earth, with a focus on the unknown America. And so I spent all this summer, I'll be telling you about what I'm doing, but the idea of this ship is really cool, because we have no idea what we're going to find. So it's like running an emergency room of a hospital. The patient comes in an ambulance, you open the door, and it could be a mother having a baby, it could be someone had a heart attack, someone got ran over by a car. How does a hospital deal with this uncertainty? Well, they have doctors there to do immediate triage, keep the patient alive, but then they're on the phones trying to get an expert, a doctor on call. Well, we've made a promise to our sponsor, the NOAA and the U.S. government and Commerce, that if we make a discovery, we will deliver the brightest mind in America to the spot of the discovery, regardless of time, depth, or location, in 20 minutes. That's a heck of a promise. Actually, it's a piece of cake, because our ship is connected with high bandwidth links. So we have our robots, our navis that carry our spirits, and the beauty is once we put them down, we don't bring them up. They stay down for days and days and days and days. So no more of this, a lot of this. And then we have a command center. And that command center is run 24 hours a day. You can go to our ships at sea right now. Go to nautiluslive.org. We're mapping right now, but next month we're going to be down in the Sea of Cortez looking at hydrothermal events. You don't want to miss it. Sign up. We'll give you social alerts. Go to nautiluslive.org. 24 hours a day. We operate around the clock, until November 19th. So we're going to be really exploring a lot. I just got off the ship and then went to Jackson Hole. That was quite a gear shift. But anyway, and we'll be back on it. But this then comes back by satellite to a facility I have at the Graduate School of Oceanography, University of Rhode Island, called the Interspace Center. I had to call it that. And it's then connected to the new internet that many of you don't know about. So internet to level 3. So the new I2 internet is 10 gigabits of bandwidth. It makes the one you're on the dirt road of the information highway. You're on a dirt road. But I'm on a superhighway, 10 gigabits. I can completely fool you into thinking you're on the bottom of the ocean. So we're able to then build clones of our command center all over the United States and literally beam people aboard. And I have 2 offices, and I have one of these in each of my office. So if I get a call, I can immediately go in and jump on the ship with my spirit and then go down to the bottom of the ocean. It's really cool. So why go? Well, there's a lot of stuff down there that's extremely important to us. Fisheries, sanctuaries that need to be preserved as nurseries to make sure that we maintain the populations of our planet. Here's the problem we're facing. 95% of the human race lives on less than 5% of Earth. 95% of the human race lives on less than 5% of the Earth. And we're also consuming the little land we have. But here's the point. Mars is not the solution. There is no exit strategy. I think it's wrong to tell children they can muck up Earth and get off the planet. There's no plan B. There's no plan B. There's no plan B. We must learn to live in harmony with this creature that we're living on. Where do you want to go? Yeah, I think I know what the answer is. Also, we have another problem. 90% of all the large fisheries of the sea have been hunted down We've been killing the top predators. We're eating the lions and the tigers and the bears of the ocean. We're hunter-gatherers out there. 11,000 years ago, we domesticated sheep and goats, and we cultivated wheat. We moved away from a hunter-gatherer society to a farming and herding society. We need to do the same in our ocean. We are way back in still massive hunting. This program I worked with called the Valhalla Project has taken a carnivore fish that we buy in the sushi restaurant called hamachi, yellowtail sushi, and flipped it to a herbivore. It now eats algae because it has a choice, eat it or die. And it's amazing how they go get it, you know. And so we're able to flip them down to the bottom of the food chain and take them into a sterile part of the ocean and not sustain the life in the sea, vastly increase the productivity of the sea. That's the end game. The end game is not to sustain what we've got, like in Kansas, sustaining prairie grass. No, we planted corn on it. And we greatly increased the productivity of that acre of land. That's what we need to do in the sea. Okay, my present project I'm having a lot of fun with. I got a few more minutes. I want to tell you one I really got excited about was the movement of humans out of Africa as we populated the planet. Now, Africa is surrounded by water and desert, so it's hard to get out. But during the ice ages, you had times when it was greening, particularly you could definitely go down the Nile. This was basically where we all came from. You should do National Geographic's Geographic. Give them a swab in your mouth and they'll trace you back. It's really cool. And I know how I got there. But anyway, you can get down to here, but then when you hit the Sinai, there's a barrier. But during the interglacial periods, it greened and you could eat your way out and drink your way out. And so humans were pulsing out. And the one I've been focusing on is this one. There's a big controversy about when humans populated the lower 48. We knew they came over 16,000 years ago when this was land during the Ice Age. This was called Beringia because it's the Bering Sea. But then they couldn't get past the glaciers. The glaciers were in their way. And the early thought was that they came down when they discovered in Clovis, New Mexico, a spearhead. They called it the Clovis Spearhead. And that was 10,000 years ago. So they thought that's when they got, that it melted enough in Montana and Wyoming that they could get through. But now there's a counter theory that they came much sooner and they went around it. And the original thought was they got in their canoes, and I went, what? Why not walk around it? And so it was one of these crazy things that scientists do when they just think about something and then they go to Google. And and I ask a simple question. So I was focusing on that, and this is an interesting curve. So this is 22,000 years ago. It's called the last glacial maximum, LGM. Last glacial maximum. This is when the glaciers were at their maximum extent. We call it in America the Wisconsin Ice Advance. And that's when there was a prodigious amount of ice. All the way where I live in Connecticut, above my house, just 12,000 years ago, was 2 miles of ice. And when you add that all up, what's disappeared? 15 million cubic kilometers of ice has melted and gone back into the sea. And so when it did that, so here, that was 22,000 years ago, that's just today. You'll notice it isn't a straight line, it's like a staircase. It steps and goes steps and steps. Because when the ice melted, the glaciers face, they say retreated, but it didn't really retreat, it just melted faster than it was advancing. All that water couldn't get away because the glaciers dammed the rivers with glacial moraines. It was called a terminal moraine. And these giant, giant lakes grew all over the planet. And then they went violently. This is where Noah's flood story came from. The Persians have a comparable one called Gilgamesh. Every ancient culture has stories of great floods, because that's what happened when the ocean violently returned to the water violently returned to the sea. So there were 6 of them. But when they were stationary, what's called a still stand, when they weren't rising, the sea was pounding against it and made caves. So I came up with this cockamamie idea. I got slammed for it by my peers, but that's always happens. I said, I'll bet you people use those caves. They said, first place, there aren't any. They were destroyed on the way up, and I said, let's go find out. So I'm going to go to each of those still stands and see if I can find caves. So I did. Now they're very quiet. But anyway, I picked on these islands because that's where we believe they came through, and that was land back then. And I had my little toys, and I had this little guy running around looking for caves because it has a little cool sonar system, and I can drive. It's like a big, video game. And we found these little holes, and we said, dive on them, because the sound wasn't coming back. If you get a black spot, it means the sound was not coming back. So I then brought in some crazy of my colleagues, Kenny Broad, who's absolutely a certified, he's really nuts. I'm just kind of nuts. And he is one of these he's actually a cultural anthropologist working in cenotes, which are sinkholes in the Maya culture. And I said, I need you to dive in my cave. So he went in, and sure enough, we found these caves. And then I said, we need to go a little deeper, Kenny. So I kept going deeper and deeper, but he would go in, and this is so they can get out. And they went in, and some of these caves had over 1,000 feet of passageways and never been explored, never been penetrated. And then I went in with my robots, and I started finding the deeper ones because it would build deeper than Kenny and his team could go. And they went deeper and deeper. In fact, I was able to find caves at all 4 of those and ran out of time, but now I know where to find these. So I was able to find caves at every still stand. And so the question is, we want to go in and look for evidence of human habitation, but we also know it's a very sensitive subject amongst the Native Americans. So how do we know which ones to do? And so what we're into a new science called environmental DNA. And environmental DNA is a fascinating new tool scientists have been given. If you can go into a river, for example, and take a cup of water from the river, we can tell what fish are in it, what species. It's because fish spawn off DNA off their bodies. And so in Hudson River, we were looking for the sturgeon. We were able to find exactly where they were by sampling the water up the rivers. But it's an amazing science. So the question is, can I smell human presence? Urine. And the answer is, and German researchers are now finding Neanderthal urine in caves. Neanderthal, much older than these caves. So I'm working now with a scientist, Beth Shapiro at the University of California, Santa Cruz, who's an expert in environmental DNA. So I'm sending Kenny in some of the caves and collecting the samples to see if I can get a signature, and particularly deep in. So it's an exciting project. But we're going to be mapping them next year, and then we're going to develop these three-dimensional mapping AUVs for we got a whole line of toys we're developing to go into these much deeper caves that are too deep for divers. And that's our end goal, is to find the humans did they really come this route? Can we find them? Can we find that they lived in those caves? Finally, my parting shot is, as you mentioned, my passion is the next generation. I'm so excited about the next generation. We just don't need to give them a big $1 trillion debt for their education. That's sort of rotten. But what I'm trying to do is to get kids excited. So I bring them on the expedition, and I bring role models. And my philosophy, Lewis and Clark's team was called the Corps of Discovery. So I call my team the Corps of Exploration. But unlike Lewis and Clark, I've mandated, because I can, that 55% of my corps will be women in positions of leadership and authority. And I picked 55 because that's the college population. 55% of our college students are women. So that's where I got the number. Sometimes they go over 55, and I have to remind them that there are guys, and they need to... I also want my corps to reflect the faces of America. Every child in middle school needs to find their face in the corps. A little older, but if you don't have to make a big deal about it. But those, you can track their eyes, and you know who they tune in on when we're standing watches, and you know who they're asking questions. They're asking questions of people that look like them. So it's critical, as you can see, and we're very fortunate to have so many wonderful people in this country apply. We actually have tougher admissions than Harvard. We only take 6% that apply to come to sea with us. So we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to choose from, and we make sure we have that mix. And then we also broadcast live. I have television production studios. This was our stats last year, 368 broadcasts. We could do one here. Come on, we got to do it here. And right into the classroom. I can go to any classroom in this country live and interact with the kids. We do museums, aquariums, and science centers. But the key is to mentor. And our ship is full of young people. We only take two kinds of people on the ship, really old and really young. Forget the middle. Okay. One of the wonderful things about the aging of our society is wisdom comes late, not in time to use it. Okay. But as we get older, we have longer times to use wisdom. So I have on every watch someone who I call the old fart. Now, to be an old fart, you have to not remember when you got tenure. Yeah, I don't know, got it way back. Because anyone that's trying to get tenure will kill their mother for data. Okay, so you don't want those in the, sort of the people in, you don't want, when you get tenure, we'll talk to you. And we may call you because you're smart, but we're going out with just the old farts. And then the young, because the young have nothing to lose to adopt a new paradigm. Change is caused by people trying something that works, and then it's adopted. And kids will try anything. And in fact, we all know these kids. They've got things in their ears, and they look like humans, but they're not, but they're the ones here now. And so we're always taking young people. And I must say, I'm biased. That's my daughter, Emily. Now, she just went on her, you got to be at least 15 to go to sea. And so the day she turned 15, because her brother had gone before her, and she said, the day I'm 15, Dad. And she started going, and she spent most of this last summer. She's now in college. But then after being mentored, they're then, constant immersion in the sciences. They live 24 hours a day in and day out, constantly learning. And then we put them that's my daughter in the hot seat. She's now a fully qualified video engineer. And you can tell how hard it is for her, right? But the idea is to get all those faces and then put them in the hot seat. Because they know if they're standing to watch, the camera's going to find them. And then they dance. And it's so beautiful. So we do wave after wave after wave of kids coming on that cruise. And it's just really renews your hope. So that's my final image. Thank you. Thank you. So, thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And we have people roaming with microphones. You all up there in the balconies. We want to hear from you.
We do.
So we have a few minutes.
We do. And if you could,
to take some questions.
If you have a question, if you raise your hand, just wait till we put the microphone.
Someone will track you down.
Yeah.
There's right there.
Yeah.
He looks like an old fart like the rest of them.
L67, and I'll be on your boat tomorrow. Okay, your rovers that are way down deep, I assume they're attached to a cable.
Well, we have different kind of rovers. The primary hunt guys, we have what are called AUVs. And AUVs are autonomous vehicles. They're drones, but they have enough intelligence to find something and then tell us about it. So we use them as what's called force multipliers. In our business, we have a saying in oceanography, 2 cables in the water is a knot. So you can only have one vehicle that's cabled. But that's the primary vehicle. So the primary vehicles are, you're in them. They're hardwired. You're sending the power down, so you have infinite time on the bottom. All the power is coming from the ship down a coaxial cable. And then you have fibers. So you've got, our command center, you think you're in a submarine with big windows. In fact, when a shark comes by, you jump back. And then we can replicate that on land. We can fool you. Now, particularly as we're moving to 4K technology and then 8K technology. In fact, our lawyers have said, just a second, this is getting too real. You need to have them sign disclaimers that if a shark goes by and they die of a heart attack, they don't sue you, even though the shark was 5,000 miles away. So, yes. But we also have the AUVs that are sort of like a wolf pack. We can send the AUVs out as swarming, and this is the whole new thing of swarming drones, swarming AUVs, where they all work as a unit. It's really pretty amazing. And so you can send us a pack of wolf dogs out, so to speak, and have them track it down, and you jump on it with your vehicle to the surface.
Just one quick question. Okay, so if it's attached to a cable, how much does the cable weigh?
Whatever you want it to. I mean, you can buoy it, weight in water or weight in air. The cable cares about what it weighs in water. So you can play with its material to make it so that the cable won't break under its own length. The deepest spot of the ocean is 35,800 feet. So we have cables that won't break under their own weight. And so, because they're armor and torque balanced, and you can put material in them that exceeds the breaking strength of their own weight. Typically, their breaking strengths are about 40,000 pounds, and our cables are less than that. So we don't have a problem with that, and we've been to the deepest depths.
Dr. Ballard over here.
Hi, Dr. Ballard. I'm here today with one of my children, but I have 2 middle schoolers, a 12-year-old boy and girl that just started 7th grade, and it's very inspiring to hear what you're doing with that age group, and I'd like to know how I can head them your way. They go to school right here.
Well, if you go to our website, we have 2 websites. One is the live expedition that's constantly rolling along, and you can immerse yourself in it, ask questions, see videos. It's really a cool website, nautiluslive.org. But we have then the website that's the trust's, oceanexplorationtrust.org, and then you'll see all of the educational programs we have, all sorts of internships. And we started, like I say, we can take a 15-year-old all the way up to the old fart. And so there's all sorts of different opportunities in high school. We have an honors program for high school kids. We have internships for college kids from freshman, sophomore, senior, junior, into postdocs, all the way up. So we have all of those people rotating through our team, our core, in large numbers. We're on this tempo we're on right now, we're at sea for 6.5 months. We're moving to an 8-month tempo because we're building a portable system. So our goal is to be at sea all the time and always on the bottom, exploring. And that means we can take a lot more people. So we always have a teacher on every watch. I mandated that there will be a teacher, and it can be a middle school teacher, it can be someone in a Boys and Girls Club, an educator, all the way up to a high school science teacher. And their job is to handle those 60,000 questions and to parcel them out to the experts that are either in the command center or in our network. When we're underwater, we have hundreds of scientists that are networked to us. So we can tap into their intellect 24 hours a day because we have watches. So we're on 4 on, 8 off, 4 on, 8 off. So we always have experts that actually know the answer. One of the biggest problems of middle school science is a lot of the teachers don't know the answers. A lot of the teachers have no background in physical sciences. They're mostly botany, biology, zoology. And so they don't know the answer, and so they tend to deflect the question. We have people actually know the answer. And we also We also embrace that sometimes we don't know the answer. It's okay not to know. Why do you think we're here? We're here because we don't know. So I think it's important that teachers flip that attitude about if they don't know. I mean, my gosh, my wife does get angry when we're at dinner and I'm using Google all through dinner to answer in a conversation. But what we have at our fingertips now to get information, now there's a lot of bad information. You have to know what to believe. But the access to data, but having teachers out there inspiring, and then they go ashore, we go right into their classroom. It's a really exciting energy that's aboard the ship all the time.
Yeah, over here, Dr. Bell.
Yes? Yep. Yeah, I mean, go to our website. There's biologists almost on every watch. Yeah. Well, like I say, go to nautiluslive.org, and I'll bet you there's a marine biologist on watch, because we're doing a lot of work in the marine sanctuaries. And in fact, so they're out there, and they're a resource they can tap into from home. I mean, the beauty of it, see, the important thing about being able to access 24 hours a day, the elephant in the room in education is the parent we can't talk about. It's the parent. And so if the parent's excited, then that's good. So we want to excite the parent too. So we want the kid to come home and say, Mom, I want to show you what I'm doing, and get the parent excited about it. Because then if the parent doesn't place value in the educational process, you got a problem. And that's really the elephant in the room. And so we want that parent excited too. So that's why we work 24 hours a day. You can't not get to us.
Yeah. To your right here, Dr. Bell.
Yes?
When you found the island, how many caves did you spotted?
How many days did it take to find the Titanic?
Well...
Is that what he said?
He said when you went to the islands and found caves.
Oh, when I went and found the caves.
Yeah.
Well, we found them. I mean, basically it was all done with our robots. And we're now going to send Kenny in, the crazy guy, on some of he's now says he can go down to 200 there's one of the main levels of caves on that staircase is around 220 feet. And he says he can go down and spend 2 hours on, they have nitrox, they have special breathing mixtures, but can't do it every day. But we have teams. So we're going to take on those deeper caves with divers, but then we're building a vehicle to take on the more deeper caves. I sent my one tethered vehicle in as far as I could get before the pilot said not. And it could reach in with we had a mapping sonar system. I was able to three-dimensionalize the cave until the cave turned. And then we couldn't see it. But we're building now AUVs, and maybe wire-guided, like today's torpedoes, which are really wire-guided. You actually drive them. And what you do is you can send a vehicle in where it's spewing copper at both ends that's more than the distance. So most wire-guided torpedoes now, when they fire a torpedo, it's not just point and fire. They can drive it. And they drive it because they're spilling out fiber from the torpedo and from the submarine faster than it's advancing until it comes up short. But you can go for miles and miles and still be hardwired. So we're looking at doing that same kind of spooling technology. And in fact, there's a new technology which is amazing, is you can actually dispense the fiber and adjust its buoyancy as you dispense it. So it'll just sit at a depth. So if you go down in a cave, it's literally the fiber will do that and sit. It's pretty amazing. By the way you coat the fiber as you let it out, you know the depth and you know what the buoyancy, and you can coat it and get it just to be neutral. So it's pretty cool technology.
Up here.
Oh yes, up there.
Yeah.
The spotlight.
I have two really quick questions. The first one goes back in time to the Celtic. I want to ask you something that's really bothered me for a long time. Did Ralph invent the mirror, or did he go down in the mirror, or did he do both? Ralph White.
What was? I've done all of the above, I think.
She was asking about this fellow Ralph.
Ralph White?
Ralph White that went down in the
Oh, I know Ralph, yes.
No. Okay, did he invent the mirror? Was he on the team?
Ralph was a cameraman on the team, yeah.
Okay, so he went down in the mirror, right?
No, we didn't go down when we discovered it.
Okay, he did not.
He wasn't on us the next trip when we went down.
Okay, and then my second...
Ralph was on the trip when we just... You're right in the spotlight, that's why I'm holding my hand.
I'm sorry.
Ralph was on the Discovery trip, which was all done with robots. No one went down.
Okay.
We went back the next year, but he wasn't on that expedition.
Okay, and then my last question is the IMAX film. I was at the premiere with you and Ralph, and you were on stage. It was a great film, and I never saw it again. It was never on television. Nobody ever put it on. Is it still being shown anywhere?
I have terrible hearing.
You had an IMAX film on the Titanic. Is it still being shown anywhere?
Peter Lowe's show on, I think, at different theaters around the world. Each theater, IMAX theater, has its own inventory of shows. So I'm sure you can go Google it. You want to Google it right now, but anyway. And you find out what IMAX theater is actually showing that show, and I'm sure they are still showing it.
Okay.
But you can just have, I think there's 75 to 80 IMAX theaters or even more around the world. I'm sure they have it in their inventory.
We have time for one last question. We'll just take it down the center here, Dr.
Yes.
What was your favorite submarine?
What was my favorite?
Submarine.
Submarine.
Your favorite submarine.
The Nautilus. Great.
Thank you, Dr. Ballard. Thank you. Thanks so much. Just terrific.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll bear with us just a few minutes while our distinguished guest departs, and then we will all exit that door. But just give us a few moments, both upstairs and downstairs. If you have a gold sticker on right here, if you could head that direction right now, that will help